Well, good morning, everybody. How you doing? This is Jeremiah. We have a webinar on making some neat little blocks. This is a really cool little technique, as you hopefully are aware. But we've been staffing up on our content side here, and so we've been kind of tearing through, making all kinds of new things, and in among that process, we kind of stumbled across this little technique, and Paul decided to kind of take us through a webinar speed with it. So it's a pretty neat little technique. You're in for a treat. I have just a couple of housekeeping items for you before we really tear into this. This is being recorded, if you didn't know, so you're going to be able to watch it again. And there is a question area, that Q&A button at the bottom. I like to go ahead right now to make sure you're aware of where it is, get that little pop-up dialog kind of situated on your screen, because you'll also be able to see any answers to anybody else's questions that have been asked. So it's kind of a nice little companion to this. But speaking of getting stuff on your screen, at the top of your screen, there's that view options. From there is how you can easily get to the exit full screen mode, just in case you need to get to something. But no, otherwise, hey, stay immersed, because this is going to be a great webinar. Hey, Paul, let's get going.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Jer, and thank you all for joining us today. My name is Paul Houchin, and I will be speaking here. If I can get my slideshow, there we are. This is me. I will be narrating your webinar. And today we're going to be working with blocks. And while we have already done a lot of various either webinars or power tips concerning blocks, we've come up with some fun new techniques that we'd like to share with you. So to start things off, I'm going to do a short little informative introduction to creating blocks in LandFX. Then we're going to take a look at the workflow of the day in a slideshow format, so that when we actually get to the demonstration part of things, the content shouldn't be too much of a surprise. Then I will move on to demonstrating, creating an elevation block, as well as some guidelines for a color render plant block. So let's start by going over a few points when working with blocks. First is, LandFX uses blocks for the majority of its content. Everything from labels to plan symbols to details to elevation graphics. They all use the block function of CAD. When we use blocks in LandFX, we have some layer standards that we recommend using, but you aren't restricted to doing so. If you look at our block layers, you'll see that each layer starts with an LK, and that simply indicates that it is a landscape block. And then following the LK is the name of the block type. In our example below, we have all the layers that are connected to a shrub block. And so the SHRB is a code indicator for shrub. And then following that, we have the object that falls on that layer. So the 013M stands for 0.13 millimeter, and that's a line type. Or rather, the color is COLR. That means that there's going to be a solid hatch color on that layer. Here are some examples of the different layer name suffixes that we use in our blocks: various line weights, color layer, center line, non-plot lines. All those are defined or referenced as the suffix of the layer. And when a block is saved into the system, proper file naming is important. Our block content files are saved with a prefix of LAFX, which is then followed by the category of blocks and then given a number. This naming system will likely be going through some changes in the near future, so I don't want to spend too much time going through these naming standards. When the changes are made, we will provide what those changes are. There. And then here's just a few tips for success when working with blocks. The first one, and these are kind of personal to me, but the first one is create simple shapes with solid boundaries to ease coloring the block. Simple shapes are going to make it really easy to place your hatches within, but then also they're not going to be very process intensive on your computer's hardware. So keeping it simple is definitely recommended. That brings us to the line work, which should only be composed of polylines, arcs, and circles. Elements such as ellipses and splines have had some issues in the past when working with land effects tools. And then my third one is to imagine what the size of the block will actually be once it's printed, and then design the detail around that. So does the amount of detail make sense with how big the block is? And for example, if I were to take this block here on the left, which is a tree with a lot of different detail within it, and then I print it out, and since all of these lines are not set to non-plot, I print it out into about an inch wide tree symbol there, and I just get a black blob. So it's way too much detail for such a small symbol. So what are we doing today? The first thing we're going to do is run through this workflow of taking a photo of a tree, this photo here, and we're going to do some image manipulation to it and transform it into basically an AutoCAD block at the end, which you see on the right there. And this workflow was provided to us from the content team, Alex Zahn and James Wooden, or as we call them in the office here, Biggie and Smalls. So shout out to these guys for coming up with this. So let's get into sort of the workflow here. First things first, we're going to open up Photoshop, and we're going to use Photoshop to clean up the image a little bit and simplify. To simplify, we're going to use various effects and layer filters, and then the cleanup is just going to be removing unwanted elements. And concerning this tree example, I wanted to actually simplify the trunk and the branching of the tree by just drawing them in Photoshop. Here's a visual example here. The image on the left is the tree canopy, or the leaves, after the effects have been applied to it, simplifying all the shapes. In the middle, which I'll show here in just a second, is me drawing the actual branching, so that the resulting image on the right there is what we'll accomplish in Photoshop. So real quick, I'm just going to show how I accomplish these branches and the trunk. And the reason I'm doing this in a video format is because I didn't want to set up the drawing tablet and have to juggle that along with Photoshop, Illustrator, and AutoCAD as well. So this just makes things a little easier. But to make these branches, I took out my pressure-sensitive tablet and pen, and I just started at the thinnest parts of the branches that I wanted to draw and applied light pressure. And as I moved my lines down along the branches, I increased the pressure to get thicker branching. So here's the quick demonstration of how I got my trunk and branches, which I'll show in the demonstration part of the presentation. After we're done with Photoshop, we're going to move on to Illustrator. And we're just going to use Illustrator to simplify the drawing a little bit further and create a vector graphic. So we're taking our raster PNG from Photoshop, applying an image trace to it, and from that we will get a vector graphic, and then we'll export those results as a DWG that can then be opened up in AutoCAD. So the image on the left here is our Photoshop results, and then the image on the right is what we're going to have from Illustrator. And when we move into CAD, we're going to do a few things right up front. First thing we're going to do is define our drawing units, and then we're going to scale the tree object itself, and then we're going to do a clean export, which is the AEC to ACAD function. And the reason we're doing that is when importing files from Illustrator into AutoCAD, it comes along with proxy objects, and I had an issue where I wasn't able to either copy, clip, or right block those objects, which you definitely need to be able to right block these objects at the end of the workflow. So doing a clean export will bypass that issue. From there, we're going to go into our actual block definition guidelines here, and we're going to separate the different hatches because they're all going to be treated individually. We're going to create boundaries for each. Then we'll remove the hatches and change those boundaries, which are going to be splines, which we don't want, into polylines, and then further simplify the polylines, replace the hatches, and then recompile all those elements together. Once those are all together, we can set up our layers so that they're appropriate. And then from that, we can save the block. So here up top, we see our tree as it's being separated out and polylines simplified. And then down below, we have a pretty optimized block here. And then the saved result printed as a PDF. Once we wrap that up, we're just going to quickly go through demonstrating proper color render plant block creation. And with that, we're going to take the line work here that you see on the left, and we're going to apply color hatches. We're going to put the lines on the appropriate layers and add a shadow as well. And why am I showing the color render block guidelines? It's because we're going to be updating our color render block soon. So if you'd like to contribute your style to the LandFX library, you can now do so. Being that color render plant blocks are one of the only elements in LandFX that are not created to be customized. This is a great opportunity for if you want to have your specific style added to the LandFX library for color symbols. And so you can send those over. So without talking too much more, let's actually get into the demonstration of making this block. All right, here we are on Photoshop. I have a tree that was provided to me from TonyTextures.com. It's a PNG, so it has a transparency to it, which means that there's no pixels in the background. It's just the tree. And for this workflow, I want to actually have white pixels in the background. It's going to help with the filters that I'll be applying to it. So if you are working with a PNG like this that is cut out, I recommend creating a new layer, bring it to the bottom of your layer list here, and filling it with white. And once you do that, you can do a Command or Control E to merge the two layers together, and then a Command or Control J to make a copy of that layer. It's always important to preserve that initial layer so we have something to fall back on if we maybe go a little too far with the effects here. So from here, I want to simplify this to something that is a bit more usable in Illustrator when creating that vector graphic. And a real simple way to do that is to use the cutout filter, which this is already set up to where I want it to be and where we're going to be, what we're going to be working with. But I went to my filters, and I'm going to apply the cutout. And I've already played with the different settings here. Different images, different scenarios may require that you play around with these sliders to get the effect that you want. If you want a more complex block, raise the number of levels and maybe take down the simplicity so you can create something that's a little more, I guess, photorealistic. Keep in mind, though, that the more detailed you get with this, the more work that's going to be put into it when actually creating the block in CAD. And also, it's not going to be very optimized for working in CAD, which means it's going to bog down your machine the more you place blocks with a lot of complexity to them. So this is all about finding that balance between the graphical integrity and how optimized it is for your system. So for this example, I'm actually going to do it was 5 levels, a 7 on the simplicity, and leave edge fidelity at 1. And before we move on, I want to just show another quick tip here. We're not going to use it today, but this can help you with certain scenarios. With this, if you have a hard time getting the cutout filter to be as simple as you want it to be, I suggest adding a Gaussian blur to the layer, somewhere between 3 and 5 pixels. It seems to be the sweet spot for this image. And just in case you're curious, this is the image size that we're working with. The resolution is just above 300, and it's basically a 8.5 by 11 inch piece of paper. So, so that 3 to 5 pixel blur gives you kind of it softens the detail a bit and blends in some of those colors, so that when you do apply a cutout filter, you get these nice, bigger, more simplified shapes. So then you can adjust your sliders there to see how you see fit. A lot of this is just going to be kind of playing with this filter to get the look and the style that you want to work with. But since this one seems to be just about right off the bat, we'll just stick with our cutout without the blur. And from here, we want to clean up some of these extra areas here. So to do so, I'm just going to take out my white brush. And start cleaning this up. And I don't know if you can see this on the video stream, but white is actually a lighter color than the background here. The background is actually kind of an off-white. So let's take our Magic Wand tool and select all of these off-white pixels and fill them with proper white. And then go in and just kind of clean this up a little bit. Anywhere that you just see like this hanging bit there, maybe this gray is a little much. You want this to be white as well. Go ahead and fill these in. Okay, and also we're going to remove the trunk, and the branching will be covered by what I've already painted. So I'm just going to remove the trunk as well. And I'm going to drag over my previously drawn out branches file here and just place it on top. One thing to keep in mind is when you do go into Illustrator, you're actually going to be simplifying the colors a little bit more. We're going to want to get about 3 different shades for the leaves when it comes to the Illustrator output. But if you notice here, there's quite a few. Should be about 7, since that's what or 5 to 7. But that'll be simplified a little bit further. So we don't have to worry too much about getting the right amount of color layers in our Photoshop step. So just simplifying it and cleaning up a little bit, making sure our background is totally white, and then also placing in the trunk and branches here is what we wanted to accomplish in Photoshop. So now I'm going to do a Command or Control-Shift-S to save as, and I'm going to save this tree image as a PNG graphic. And I'm not using JPEG because I don't want any image compression to knock down the quality of it. And I'm just going to say 01 because that's our first step from Photoshop. So save that. You're going to have some PNG format options here. Large file is pretty much all I use for this. So just click OK. And now we're done with Photoshop, and we can move on to Illustrator. Just a second here. Okay, so I'm just opening up that file in Illustrator now. Let's go full screen. Okay, so just like in Photoshop, I can use the spacebar to pan around my image here. Notice the image is poking out a little bit beyond my artboard, so I'm just going to shrink this down, holding the Shift key so I get an even scale here, so that it all fits within my artboard. And so all I'm going to be doing in here is an image trace. So I get a vector graphic and then exporting as a DWG. If you don't have your image trace options open, head up to Window, and then click on Image Trace. And that'll pull open this dialog here. And let's go through these settings real quick, or at least the settings that I found worked well for this demonstration. First off, unclick Preview. If you have Preview selected, every time you make a little change within these settings, it's going to update the graphic, and that can take quite a few seconds there. So unclick that until you get your sort of base settings down, and then you can do the trace and then adjust, one setting at a time while it updates if you're trying to find that sweet spot for your trace results. So starting here at the top, I'm going to ignore preset, leave this at tracing results for view, but we're going to change mode to color. Notice that the preset changed to custom, which is what we want. And now here we have a slider to change how many colors you actually want to apply to this vector graphic. So if I do 3 colors, it's going to turn this image into a 3 color value vector graphic. And what I found, let me just make sure I'm doing this right. So it looks like the 5 is the colors that I want to stick with. That gives me just enough simplicity, and also gives me the dark values of the tree, the midtones, and the highlights, and preserves the branching. I'm going to choose ignore white in options so that it doesn't count in the white background. And I'm just going to change paths, corners, and noise all the way down to the left. I'm doing so just to get this to be as simple as possible. And when I have these set up, I'll hit trace, and it's going to process for a little bit. See, so if you had preview on, it would basically take about this much time to refresh the image every time you did any kind of change into these settings. So it can really bog you down on time. Okay, and there we go. Notice it simplified the shapes a bit, but most importantly, it took my leaves down to 3 different colors. So I've got my highlights here, I've got a mid-tone green, and then this kind of forest green as the shadow, while leaving the branching. So once we're good on this, we just want to go ahead and go up to File, Export, Export As. And we're going to save this as a AutoCAD drawing, DWG, and click Export. And I found that all the default settings work fine for this, so just click OK. And now we can move on to CAD. So I'm just going to open up my CAD file here by double-clicking on it. And you can just click yes to this message. All right, here we go. We have a DWG of the image. So at this point, I mean, this is something that you can use within AutoCAD, but it's not optimized, and it contains splines and hatches that can be optimized a bit more to be a little more efficient on your machine. Plus, we don't want splines. So let's get this set up for that. First thing we should do, though, is make sure our units are set to how we want them to be. So it's set to decimal inches, and I like to work in architectural inches when making blocks. So I'm going to change that to arc inches. And then I figure this tree is going to be about 20 feet tall. So I want to now scale the tree. I'm going to select it, type SC for scale, and hit enter. I'm going to hit a base point somewhere down below, R for reference, and then I'm going to draw a line from the top of the tree to the bottom of the tree. I can turn on ortho so I get a straight vertical line. And now I want that length to be 20 feet. And since I'm in inches, it's going to be 240. Okay, so now my scale is good. My units are set. Last thing I want to do before moving on is do a clean export of this drawing here. And so to do so, I want to head over to my Manage tab and click on the Clean Export button. And it's done. You can see down here the file path name, and now I have the O2 tree-cleaned, and that's going to be my clean file. So I can close this. And open up the clean version. So now I should be able to copy clip and right block this out without any error messages. So what do we need to do? We need to separate out the hatches, clean it up, define our polylines, rehatch it, put it back together. If you click on this and you look at its properties, you'll notice that it's a block reference. So before we do anything, we want to explode the block with the explode command, or X. And it's a block within a block, so I want to explode it again. That's just X and enter. So now if we click on one of these, we've got a pretty complex hatch here. And while in CAD, you can do a little more cleanup. I know I don't want that in there. Once this is how you want it to be and you want to start simplifying, go ahead and start separating out the hatches. And so to do that, what we want to do is select one of the hatches, say the highlight, and recognize at the top here what the color value is. 150, 168, 85. And then we're going to use the quick select command, which is Q select. And we're going to use the object type to hatch, properties color, and the value, it should equal that color value, 150, 168, 185. So that's already in here. Sometimes selecting that hatch doesn't actually bring in this as a recently used number, so you'd actually have to go into select color, head over to true color, and type in this value here. And don't put any spaces between the commas because it'll not work. But we want to make sure that we select all of this color And if it doesn't grab it the first time, try once again. There we go. So it's grabbed all of those different hatches of that color value. Now I'm going to copy these and place them over 200 inches to the right. And so you want to make sure that when you do this step, you're going to copy each hatch over a specified distance, probably an equal distance from each other. And also use ortho on so that it's perfectly horizontal to where it's coming from. So I'm going to use the copy command, or C, enter. I believe that used to be CO, enter, until a recent update. So C for copy, press enter. It's going to now ask for a base point. I'm going to click somewhere down here and drag over to the right. And if you notice, my dash line is completely horizontal because I have ortho mode on. If you don't have ortho mode on, hit the F8 key to toggle it on. So after I drag it to the right a bit, I'm going to type in 200, and it's going to place 200 inches to the right. Basically, that number just needs to be farther enough away so I can easily work with the hatches separately from the main object here. Now I just want to repeat those steps for the different tones here. So let's move on to my mid-tone greens. And it's this color value up here. Go to quick select. Let's see if it put it in this. See, this time it didn't pull that value into that list. So now I want to type this in manually, which is 107, 125, 55. Okay. And that should have grabbed all those hatches, but it looks like it didn't grab these. So these might be a little bit different. So let's go to quick select again, see if we can get it to select all of those. Oh. Okay, so let's first move this set over. This green might just be a slightly different green. So I can quick select those and just place them over here. Use the copy command, choose your base point, drag to the right, and place it 400 inches over, since we're doing increments of 200. And let's see what this is. Appears to be the same color value, so let's see if we can't grab these. There we go. Okay, let's copy these over now. And I'm going to place these 600 inches over just so they don't overlap this. And delete this set. And move this over. There we go. Okay, now we're back on track. So make sure you grab all those hatches there. Let's move on to our shadow here. Use our quick select. Hatch color. So we want to use that color value, which is 63, 73, and 42. Click OK. Not sure why it's not grabbing them this time. Of course, it happens while in the middle of the presentation. Oh, maybe if I typed in the right color value. Okay, 63, 73, 42, 42.
You also had current selection in the quick select box.
Is that, okay, so this is the right color value. Oh, in the apply to, or what?
Yeah, and apply to. At
Okay,
least
that's what it
just the
was.
last time, but before you had entire drawings. So
Yeah, okay, well, we got it selected now.
okay.
That was probably user error. So let's move on from that, do a copy, bring this over. So we're doing 200, 200, 400, 600 over. And finally, let's grab our branching. So that's an easy color to remember. It's 332. And let's just wait a second here. Sometimes when hovering over the Illustrator output, CAD has a little bit of a hiccup and takes a few seconds to respond. So a tip there, try not to hover your mouse over the actual Illustrator objects too much. Okay. Quick select. Let's grab an entire drawing. That's definitely what it was. And do a 3, 3, 2. Okay. Now we can copy this over. All right. So now we've separated our hatches out. And what we want to do is generate a boundary around each of these hatches, and then we'll work with those boundaries. So what I can do is do a window selection over everything, and then I'm going to type the command hatch generate boundary. And so if you have any hatches without boundaries, that is how you can generate a spline around those different hatches. I can then now remove, actually before we remove these, let's take note of what these colors are. They'll probably be remembered in the recently used hatching ribbon in the hatch editor, but just to be sure we get the right color values, I'm going to draw little rectangles down below each of these and actually place an instance of that hatch color below, just so I have a good sense for reference. And a quick way to do this is to use the Site Color tool in LandFX. That's just Site Color, or you can find it in the FX Site ribbon. And this has a neat little eyedropper tool here, so I can go and grab this hatch. It's going to pull up in that hatch color and then place it into this box there. Escape out of it, use the eyedropper again, grab this hatch, place it below, and continue this for all the hatches. So now I have a good reference points to when I reapply the hatching. Now I can go in here and select one of these hatches, right click on it, choose the select similar option, and then hold down the shift key and draw a window over this guy, because I don't want to mess with the original too much. But now I have all my other hatches selected, and I can just hit the delete key to remove them. So now we have our outlines. We want to simplify them. To do so, we are first going to need to turn the splines into polylines. Quick way to do that is to type in the P edit command, hit enter, choose the multiple option by pressing M, enter, or clicking on that multiple button down there at the bottom. And then I'm just going to draw a window over all these objects. And when I have them all selected, click enter. And I want to convert lines, arcs, splines to polylines. So choose yes there down at the bottom. And then it's going to ask for a precision to turn those splines into polylines. And the lowest number here is 1. That's going to be the simplest way to do it. So type in 1, hit enter again. And now let's zoom in and check out what we have here. We have polylines, and the splines are still there. So if the splines are still there, do a select similar. Once again, let's deselect this over here and hit delete. So now we should only have polylines in our working set. Okay. Now what we want to do is we can rehatch this, put it together, and call it good. But we want to simplify it a little bit further so it's a little more optimized for our use later on. And so Jeremiah did just develop a new command called polysimplify that'll do that for you. So what you want to do is type in poly simplify, hit enter, and then once again draw a window over all these objects. And I'm going to skip the branching here because it's not too complex, and I found that polysimplify kind of makes it look a little, it simplifies a little too much. So I'm actually going to leave that as it is, but simplify the leaves. Hit enter when done. It's going to process. And basically what it's doing is it's removing vertices in the polylines, so it's making them simpler. It's pretty self-explanatory. And then at this point, you can go in and using the selection to the right there, select some of these little bits that you just don't really need and clean it up a little more before moving on. So little things like this, just inconsequential to the actual graphic, can be removed.
I would say, wouldn't another way you could select all polyline, you could use quick select polylines under a certain length perhaps, right?
Yeah, but there are still some, does that select the
it would
entire?
it would take a little testing, but you might be able to come up with like anything under, in this case I don't know what that is, anything maybe under 2 or 3 inches could probably safely be deleted.
Mm-hmm. Sure, I could see that working out well, but I did not test it, so I don't want to just try that while live so much. But okay, perhaps that's something worth looking into. But once we have our polylines simplified, we need to now recompile everything. So a quick way to do that is to open up your AutoCAD hatch tool by typing hatch. And we're going to choose, make sure it's set to solid, and choose our light color. Looks like these are neatly organized from light to dark. So let's choose our light or highlight color. And then we're going to do a selection. So you can, I believe you can just draw a, oh, nope. Okay, try this once again. Okay, so it's already set to our color. We're going to do select objects. And now we should be able to draw our window around all of these objects. And voila, everything is hatched all nice and perfectly. Move on to our mid-tone greens with the hatch tool. Change our color to the mid-tone greens. The select objects option is already chosen. So once again, draw a window around these. Looks like I missed this bit. So do that for each color value, but end the command before moving on to another color value. So hit enter when finished with each one. Otherwise, the hatches will be tied up and it could be a mess. So do this once again for the darker leaves. Enter. And finally, our trunk. Enter. Okay. So now we are on our way to getting this block made. All we need to do is recompile it, set up our layers, and save it out. So let's start with the highlights, and we'll move this way. So simply select all of those highlight hatches, type M for move, choose a area for the base point, and with ortho on, we're going to drag to the right and go over 200 inches. Then we're going to select both those objects, move over to the right 200 inches, and now these objects move over 200 inches. So now if I displaced everything properly, it should pretty much line up on top of each other. And now we have this very, very simplified block compared to this guy over here. So let me just set up the layers, and then I'll save it and show the two different blocks and how they're different. So if you want to use our layer standards and you don't have them set up already, but you'd like to, head over to, well, whatever block type it is. For this instance, it's an elevation tree block. So I'm going to go to my elevation graphics here, go to plants, trees, and just choose one of these. Let's choose a nice one. I think this is one of our newer ones. Click OK, and then place it in. And what that does is that imports all of your different layers for that block already. So now we can simply start moving these objects over to these layers. And one thing I like about this workflow, or what to do with these lines, is I like to make them all non-plot because of how the graphic is. The outline doesn't look that great when this comes from an Illustrator. So I want to change actually all of these polylines to the tree non-plot layer. So I'm going to select one, do a select similar, and then I don't even need these anymore, but I want to make sure I deselect everything that I'm not working with, and change this over to the tree non-plot. And finally, I'm going to do a select similar on all these hatches, making sure to deselect everything else. And I'm going to place this on the LK tree color layer, which is off, so it's going to tell me it's off. So that now if I turn on my color, it's now going to act like all my other land effects objects. At this point, we can go over to layout, zoom in on a bit, and just kind of see what it looks like in a print preview real quick. And that's a kind of a low resolution preview of it, but still looks good enough for this instance. I'm going to save it into my blocks folder now. I can remove some of this extra stuff here. And I'm going to do a PRG just to purge out the unused layers. And I'm going to save this into the library. To do that quickly, head up to the FX Site tab, click on Save Block. I'm going to put my insertion point right down here at the bottom. Select everything in the tree, and it's going to take me right to my Land Effects blocks folders. I can head into Elevation Graphics, Plants. I already have a webinar folder set up for this. I'm just going to call it LAFX tree -1 or maybe web1 and save. It's going to give me a little preview of the slide here. This is what it's going to look like in the dialog to pick it. And for these elevation graphics, we could do one-to-one. That'll put in a 20-foot tree whenever I use it, but I want to actually use manual, because with elevation graphics, it's nice to be able to kind of manually adjust the scale to objects as you place them in. And that's how you get that rubber band effect when you actually place in an elevation graphic. So I can go into my library now and head to webinar. There's my tree, click OK, click, and rubber band it in. So I now have this pretty cool block. And I just want to quickly compare this to this block here, because you might be saying this one is maybe a little more detailed, better defined. So, but if I were to save this into the library, save block, insertion point, plants, webinar, maybe not optimized. Notice how it took a pretty long time just to save that in there, and then set my scale, hit OK. Let's go check it out. These are the actual files. Oh, it's not too bad. 700 kilobytes is pretty good. We did a good job of simplifying it beforehand in Photoshop and Illustrator. It's funny though, I followed the exact same workflow and saved this non-optimized version, and it came out to be like a 1.5 megabytes, which for a block in CAD, it's pretty big. Definitely sticking to under 500 kilobytes for a block to be used with Land Effects is ideal. But you can still see that this is half the size compared to the non-optimized version. Okay, so let's take questions on this real quick, and then I'll wrap up with a color render example.
Yeah, so well, I think everyone has been like me and has just been really watching this and totally forgot to type in questions because we don't have any questions.
Okay.
I've just been mesmerized by this. Usually I'm over here getting some other work done, but I just stopped and was actually watching the webinar this time. But if people do have questions, now's a great time to type them in. So why don't you give them a second to get those in, and I'll get them queued up, and you can touch on this color block issue you want.
Yeah, so I'm just going to show this real quick, and then whatever questions you have, yeah, we can just take them after. This should be quick. Gather my notes here. Okay, so like I said, we're going to be adding more colored symbols to our library soon. So if you want to send us some ideas for that, here is how you can set those blocks up to better get them approved on our end. So what I have here, I just have a bunch of lines on layer 0. And I kind of give the lines an offset version of line as well to give it kind of a sketchy look, kind of a hand-drawn look. And so I want to first place these on the appropriate layers, and I'm going to use layer states. I didn't mention this before, but when I took in a block, or yeah, the elevation block, it brought in those layers. If you'd like to save those layers so you don't have to open up a block to get the layers, once they're in here, click Save Layer State, and that's going to take you into your layer states folder, and you can put those in, say, the blocks area, and then you'll have all those layers. So I've already done this with a colored block. I did the same thing where I took in a Land Effects color block and then saved those layers into a layer state right in my blocks folder, and I called it color tree. So now I can open this up, and it's going to bring in all of my tree color layers for the most part. We have in here we have tree color D, M, and normally L. So it's light, dark, and medium. We try to, with the color blocks, have 3 different color values, the dark, medium, and light, or highlight rather. And those colors, unlike most other things in Land Effects, are not set to color by layer. They have the true color attached to them, so the layer color doesn't matter as much. But they have, if you look at them over here, the dark is a dark green, medium is medium green, and the light is almost like a yellow green. And then we have our outline layers here, shadow layer, trunk. So let's first move this is my trunk over to the trunk layer. And I want one of these outlines to be the thick outline. So that's going to be a 0.50 millimeter line. So I'm going to set that to the 050M. The line that's kind of the sketchy line around it is going to be thinner. I'm going to set that to the red layer, which is 0.25 millimeters. And then one of these, is a boundary line that I'm going to place on a 0.13 millimeter layer, as I'm going to do with these sketchy lines that aren't actually a boundary. Put those on this outline layer. Okay, moving along. Now I want to add color. I'm just going to use my cool Site Color tool here because it just makes colorizing things so much easier. I'm going to choose nice green. Notice I choose this green and it gives me 2 shades darker and 2 shades lighter. So I don't even have to find out different shades for this. I'm going to do this dark green as my darker edge here. And I'm going to choose the multiple option here. So I can type M, and it's going to ask me to choose the outline or the boundary. And then also I want to choose the interior line that it's going to be excluded from. Hit enter when done. It's going to fill that in. And then I'm going to place my medium color on the inside here. Now, if I try to select this polyline, it's going to recognize that it's tied to this hatch here, and it's going to ask if I want to replace it. So instead, I'm just going to click in the middle. And so now it's colored. We want to then, by default, it places colors on this layer. So let's take those hatches and put them on the appropriate layer before we move on, which is, not all of them on one layer. This one is going to go on the color M for medium, and this one's going to go on our dark color layer. These layers do have a transparency to them, so that's why it looks a little more white than before because it's on a white background. But it's a tree, so you kind of want to see what's under the canopy. So there's a 50% transparency on these by default. Now I want to add a shadow. There we go. And my method for doing shadows quickly is to take your boundary line, copy it, and place it over to the right, and then paste another boundary a little bit offset to the left or the right as well. And all shadows for Land Effects objects should point directly right. That way, when you adjust the shadows, they'll all be keeping the same angle. So directly to the right is where they should fall. And now I want to create a boundary for a shadow. I'm going to select these items and use the trim command, TR for short. And I'm going to trim off these segments here so that I can quickly delete those other lines. And now I have more or less a boundary for my shadows. Let's just trim this up a little more here. Okay, as long as I can place hatches within this. So the shadow layer is color by layer. So let's place our polylines on that layer. And then also let's place a hatch within. Solid. We'll do by layer. And I want to pick an internal point like that and fill in our shadows. Once we have our shadow ready to go, let's go ahead and move using OSnap as a way to reference where it gets placed. Pick a, say, this corner here, and you know that that should line up right there. Looks like it's not actually on the right layer quite yet. Make sure we just select the shadow objects. Okay, and let's place this on the shadow layer. There we go. Okay, notice that has a transparency as well. So now that our block is saved up, we can preview it just to see what it looks like if it's printed. Oh, and if we use the correct plot style table, should be right. All right, and then once we have that set up, go ahead and save this out, and you can send that over to us, and we can take a look at it. Did any questions come in?
Yeah, we did get just one question, and it was a really simple, and it was a good question from Daniel. But just, if we were to use this technique, would we be able to use the site color tool to change the colors of that tree? And of course, and that's part of the beauty of exactly the technique is definitely want to be able to use that site color palette to change colors.
Sure. So that can go a couple of ways. You can, while building the block, choose a different color. Click on it. It's going to tell you that there's already a hatch there, but you can change it to, say, a kind of an ugly yellow and orange block. Actually, it's not that bad. Very quickly, but also what's neat. Oh, let's see if I can demonstrate this real quick. If we pull open a project, and this is very bad practice, don't do what I'm doing right now. Just opening up project willy-nilly. There we go. And place a tree. Let's give it a color. So it's got this green color. Turn that on. And say we have a couple of instances in there and you want to change these, you can basically place the color right on top of the block. And it's going to change all of those color values to that color. Just like that. So it's a way to go in and quickly kind of customize plants that are already placed into your drawing via blocks. However, if you do turn off the color and turn it back on, it's going to revert back to the original blocks.
So, well, cool. So yeah, like you said, if you guys out there have some styles of these sorts of blocks you'd like to send in, please do, because we are, as we saw, we got Biggie Smalls over there cranking away on a lot of things like this. Gee, I guess the only other thing to say is to have a great weekend.
All right. Yeah. Thank you, Jer. Thank you all for showing up, and let us know if you have any questions. Let me pull up in my slide here. if you do have any color render plant blocks that you would like to send in, we have an inbox just for that. It's submissions@landeffects.com. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to give us a call or email us at support@landeffects.com. And have a good weekend.